A few months ago, I did a video on planting a pumpkin patch in poor soil using my patented David the Good melon pit method of spot improving small areas and then planting pumpkins or melons on top of those. Well, I'm back to give you a report from the field. We're going to take a look at how these pumpkins have done, and you'll see that this method works. Now we have a combination of Maxima and Machada pumpkins here. This is a Maxima. These guys came from these slate gray-green colored pumpkins. There was a pumpkin at Walmart, $6. It was in the fall display box, you know, just a big bunch of heirloom pumpkins, fall display. So I planted seeds from it, and to my surprise, we ended up with some bright orange ones. We ended up with some green ones. We ended up with a variety. So my guess is what happened was a farmer somewhere got a collection of heirloom pumpkin seeds for different beautiful varieties of Maximas, planted them in a field. When they grew, he sold a lot to Walmart. And the pumpkin itself, if you plant the seeds for a variety, like say it's Blue Hubbard. If you plant Blue Hubbard, which is sometimes called a winter squash, but a winter squash and a pumpkin, same thing. Same thing, different names. Same species, everything. If you plant that Blue Hubbard squash, you plant seeds for a Blue Hubbard, they'll grow out and they will give you Blue Hubbard. But if, say, you were growing Boston Marrow right next to it, they'll cross-pollinate, but that will not affect the look of the pumpkin at all in that generation. It's not like you're going to get a cross because they cross-pollinated. The seeds will contain a mix between that Boston Marrow and the Blue Hubbard, but the pumpkins themselves will look like whatever the mother was, because this pumpkin is part of the mother's body. This is the womb. The distinct individuals inside of this are a cross of various Maxima pumpkins. This is a function of the mother. So if you were to plant Blue Hubbards together with Blue Hubbards, you just keep getting Blue Hubbards because that variety has been stabilized. Those are what you're going to get. That is a standard heirloom variety. But if you planted Boston Marrow right next to your Blue Hubbards, you would get a bunch of pumpkins that were very obviously Boston Marrow, and you would get Hubbards that looked just like your regular Blue Hubbards. Exactly. Until you planted the seeds. Then you would get mixes between the two. You would get aspects of both parents. But think of a beautiful pregnant lady. This is her belly. The belly doesn't change based on her husband. It is what it is. This is part of the mother plant. But the seeds that are inside are distinct individuals. So it's kind of interesting. We planted slate gray green, and here's another one. This is another one of the vines. This does not look like the mother, and this is not bright orange, but this is another Maxima pumpkin. They're the same species, so they can all interbreed, but we really don't know what we're gonna get because we don't know what that original farmer planted. Obviously, he had multiple varieties there. Let's take a look over here. So about 10 feet away from that other orange pumpkin, here's another brilliant, beautiful orange pumpkin. And if I were to take the seeds from this and plant them, what do you think I would get? Well, I'm not going to get just orange pumpkins. I'm going to get a mix. If I wanted to breed for orange pumpkins, I would have to constantly remove any individuals that do not fit the type that I like. I would be watching the shape and the color of the pumpkins as soon as they appeared to see, oh, I'm going to take that one out or I'm going to leave that one. These were actually a bright yellow even when they were this big. whereas the green ones were not bright yellow when they were this big. It was obvious that I was going to get a bright orange pumpkin. In retrospect, now I know what to look for. The bright yellow little ovaries on the plants turned into orange ones, and the ones that were not bright yellow did not. So I would watch for that next generation, and I would rogue out all of the ones that didn't fit. And I would just plant seeds from the orange pumpkins until over time you have less and less of green or white or blue or whatever else is in that mix. Here's another one. Look at this gorgeous pumpkin here. This is a very nice orange, but you see, this is a like paint your Miami house color orange. This isn't orange like a Connecticut field pumpkin, jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. This is an interior decorator orange. This is like the interior design pumpkin. That is just, I mean, what a color. Take that sucker down to Sherwin-Williams, match it, and paint my house that color. Now I'm going to show you a pumpkin that looks like, somewhat like the original that we planted. Check this guy out. Now again, we had a pumpkin from Walmart. We cut it open, it tasted delicious, nice dense flesh, very good flavor. And we saved the seeds and I planted them this spring. They looked almost like this color right here. This is another interior design color. This is called dingy green gray. I've seen this color all over Fort Lauderdale as well. People paint their houses this color or a little bit darker. But I love the way it looks. It's that cool kind of gray green. But the original pumpkin was rounder. This one is getting a flatter, more like a pie shape, I would say, than the original one. So the genetic variation inside of pumpkins is incredible, and there's so many color, flavor, shape differences inside of the world of pumpkins. They're always a joy, especially when they get mixed up. Just to see what happens is cool. This pumpkin here is a Seminole pumpkin. The Seminole pumpkin is an heirloom variety from Florida. This is one of the larger variants. I actually have a page on my website showing all the different variants of Seminole pumpkin from different people who have sent me photos. I'll put a link to that below this video as well. There's a lot of variation. And I planted a variety of seeds from different people. This one is a lot like my old variety. It's large. They would get up to about 12 pounds. Usually they're between 6 and 12 with a pretty common 9, 10 size. And people think that pumpkins are bland because often the only pumpkin we've had is either in pumpkin pie, where you just cover it with enough seasonings and sugar to make it delicious, or maybe you've tried eating some of that jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. Well, guess what? Those jack-o'-lantern pumpkins are bred for looks, not for flavor. They look great, they have a terrible personality. They're bland and stringy and blah. Whereas a good pumpkin, whether it's a Maxima, a Peppo, or a Machado, which are all varieties of pumpkins. We grow multiple varieties. A good one has a rich flavor to it. It can be dense and nutty, it can be sweet, it can be starchy. Depending on the variety, you get different flavors. So there's variations in the way they look, and there's variations in the way they taste. And you may have a pumpkin that looks fantastic but tastes terrible. You might have a pumpkin that looks ugly as sin but tastes great. The Seminole pumpkin is very vigorous, and I would say it's similar in flavor to a butternut but not quite as sweet. It's got a nice texture to the flesh. And one of the things that really recommends it as a survival crop in particular is that they keep forever. Like my friend Alex Ojeda from Permaculture Jacksonville, he gave me a Seminole pumpkin some years ago that he had kept on his shelf for 2 years. And we opened it up and the flesh had dried out somewhat inside, but it was still edible. Unbelievable. It is a super keeper. It has a rind that just lasts and lasts and lasts. So some pumpkins are not like that. If you grew, say, spaghetti squash, that is a Peppo variety. If you grew spaghetti squash and you tried to leave it on your counter for 6 to 12 months, it's gonna rot, it gives up. But there were varieties of keeping pumpkins that our ancestors grew, and those pumpkins were excellent. You could store them at room temperature and you could still have food. Seminole pumpkin is like that. And it's a machata, so you have to be careful, because another machata is the butternut squash. If you plant butternut squash and Seminole pumpkins together and then save the seeds, you're gonna get a cross in between. It'll still be a good pumpkin slash squash, but it won't be what you started with. It won't have necessarily the keeping ability or the vigor of Seminole pumpkins, but it may have some more of the flavor of butternut. So you can go ahead and cross it, but just know this, you're never gonna get exactly a butternut or exactly a Seminole again, because those varieties have stabilized as what they are. And when you cross them, who knows what you're gonna get. You're gonna get all kinds of variation. If you like that sort of thing, it's no problem. They're all gonna be edible, but know what you may lose in the process. I've accidentally crossed my Seminole pumpkins with calabazas, and you get some interesting effects. You know, I have a variety of Seminole pumpkin right now that's growing over there that's crossed with a calabaza. Let me show you that. Calabazas from South America, Central America, they're a necked pumpkin, and you'll see them for sale in markets occasionally, international markets, sometimes in Publix and elsewhere. They have that long curvy neck and then a cavity down here that has seeds in it. The neck is all solid flesh. This variety here came from my friend Mark. Mark gave me seeds for it, and he had a great big one. Mine is not as pretty as the one he originally gave me seeds from, but it's a Seminole pumpkin. It's got the genes for it. It's a machata. It's got the leaves. The leaves on those Seminole pumpkins often have this patchy look like this, kind of pretty, like a little bit of silver edging. And it's got the genes from those rounded Seminoles, but it's also got the genes from some sort of calabaza or necked pumpkin. So this area here is all gonna be solid flesh. This is actually beneficial for cooking because you get more flesh where you have to do less work to get it. You just scoop the seeds out of the bottom, and this part you just skin it and you've got all of this flesh up here. It's great, but it's not the original variety, and it doesn't look like the original variety. So you've gotta know, what do you want? Do you want to maintain an heirloom, or do you want to just let them go? Now, you might ask next, isn't this going to cross with those bright orange pumpkins or those pale green pumpkins that I got from Walmart? No, it won't. This leaf right here is a machata leaf. This leaf right here is a maxima leaf. Cucurbita machata, Cucurbita maxima. These varieties don't cross. So they're cousins, they grow very similarly, but I can grow them right next to each other and they don't crossbreed. So this will, however, crossbreed with my other Seminole pumpkin varieties. And I've got multiple types out here. So I've got some with necks, I've got some tiny ones, I've got some that are like my old variety. I had no idea what any of them were gonna look like except for this one, because when he gave me seeds, I saw the pumpkin. But we don't know what we'll get in the next generation for our machatas, and we don't know what we'll get for our maximas, but our maximas and our machatas are not gonna cross. If you were to grow summer squash, that's a Cucurbita Peppo, you could grow blue Hubbards, which are a maxima, and you could grow butternut at the same time, and they're not gonna cross with each other. You can grow 3 distinct varieties of pumpkins without having them cross, which is a great thing if you like to grow different squash and pumpkins. And I use pumpkins to refer to all winter squash as well, just because I spent a lot of time overseas and my language has gotten a little funny. Like, I call this a cutlass instead of a machete, because this is what they always called it in the Caribbean. It's a cutlass. It's a cutlass style, right? So it's a cutlass. So machete, I don't know. Anyhow, you know what I mean. Winter squash, pumpkins, same thing. Now, to plant these pumpkins, you saw my video, possibly. If you haven't, you can go back and watch it, where I actually made the pits. Each set of seeds here, I planted 3 or 4 seeds on a hill, and the hill was made by digging a hole in the ground, burning inside of it so it had ashes in it, and then throwing in some leftovers from the fridge. So there's a high amount of fertility right in one little spot. Even though my soil here is terrible, I'm growing decent pumpkins and I didn't have to fertilize the entire area. Dig a hole and plant it. This one here, you can see there are two pumpkin vines that managed to live, and they're running all over the place. Disentangling them at this point is impossible. But they'll run out from this central location. You just have to make sure that they have some nutrition. They love to be where you've burned. If you have a burn pile and you turn it under into the soil and you plant pumpkins on top of it, they thrive on that. They don't like a lot of competition at the beginning, so if you plant them in the middle of a grassy area, it's not the best. This whole area was tilled. The weeds are coming up in between. I've got these bits and pieces of weeds like this coming up and showing up, but that's not that big a deal. Once the pumpkins have gripped and taken over the area, they're pretty fine. But when they first start, you run the risk of them being choked out. So to grow good pumpkins, clear the area and try to keep the weeds cleared around them as they first start running. I came out here and weeded around them until they started to get taller and taller, and now it's like, I could barely weed without damaging pumpkins. It's kind of like the parable of the wheat and the tares. If I start pulling weeds, I'm gonna end up chopping and pulling pumpkins because there's vines scattered all through this area. But pumpkins like some fertility. It doesn't have to be super fertile. I mean, if you had a couple of cups of raw chicken manure and you made a hill and you just dumped it in there, or half a shovel full, that's great. You have some leftover, some pork chop bones, T-bones, a little bit of meat on them, throw them in the hole. If a squirrel tragically died while eating your corn, you could bury the squirrel in there. Fish guts, that all works. Some sort of long-term fertility. Now, this isn't really my original method. I was joking about that. I got this method from reading Steve Solomon, who had read about Native Americans doing it. The idea of having a refuse pile and letting your pumpkins grow on it. So I've experimented with different methods, and I renamed it the melon pit because I first used it to grow melons, but it's great for any kind of a vining plant that's going to cover the area. You dig your hole, you put some high fertility into it, you put enough soil on top of it that the roots are not going right down into super rich stuff. If they go right down into raw chicken manure, that'll kill them, or it'll burn them, or they're not very happy. But if they have a little bit of soil and they can just kind of touch the end of their roots into there with some space to work around it, over the course of the season, as that stuff rots down in there, it will feed them and they will just grow and grow and grow and grow. It's like the Indians digging holes, putting fish in them and planting corn over the fish. It's the same idea, except you're doing it with pumpkins. And it's obviously very successful.
I'm driving with the top down, baby. Rain won't stop me. I'm high on black coffee, baby. Your blues won't rock me. I'm planting on the seat cone, baby. Some girls can't stop me. I'm cranking up the bass and baby, and you can't drop me. Sugar pie.
Overall, pumpkins are very easy to grow. They are not particularly demanding. If you have moderate fertility to the soil, if you keep the weeds down, they really like the melon pit method. They will run and run and run, and they're exciting to watch run. If you've ever had them show up in your compost pile, you know that if they have some fertility to start and they start running, they will run and run and run. But a few more cultural notes on pumpkins. Pumpkins are a warm weather crop. They cannot take frost. You've got to make sure that you plant a variety that will grow inside of the time period where it stays warm. If you have a very short growing season, you're really going to be limited more to summer squash and fast growing varieties that can produce a pumpkin or a squash that will keep through the winter but will actually mature before it freezes. Freezes will destroy your crop. So what you want to do is plant after all danger of frost is past. They like the soil warm. They want to run. They're by nature tropical. They like to be warm. And if you get them after that last frost date and they're in fertile soil and you water them in, they'll just run. Another thing is don't plant them too close together. Remember that they're going to just run and run and run. When I first planted this area here, my hills were at least 8 feet apart, and now they've filled this up and they're filling up the final gaps in the area. Give them plenty of space. The roots beneath the ground will actually run a long, long ways, and they'll root along the stems, which later in the year, if squash borers are a problem in your area, this rooting along the stems is kind of important and very helpful because it makes the plant modular. So, like right here, let me see. Look at this. There's a root coming out of the stem right here. This is not the base of the plant, but we can give this plant a little more help and basically ground layer it so it is more able to withstand squash borers. Squash borers are really nasty pests. The mama squash borer flies over, lays an egg or more around into the stem of your pumpkin, and it will get inside there and it'll start chewing. And then one day, you won't know that this is happening until one day, all the leaves have fallen on your beautiful, amazing winter squash plant. And you go, what happened? Maybe I have to water it. And you go out and water it, and it doesn't make any difference because that stupid little grub has now destroyed a chunk of the vascular system of the plant. So the roots can't send the water up that the rest of the plant needs. From that point on, where that squash borer has bored in, and it's usually right near the stem, the base of the stem, that's it. That's where the plant stops. The rest of it will die, and you'll often, oh, it's terrible. You'll lose, little pumpkins are starting to grow and everything, and it looks great, and then next thing you know, that's it. The whole thing dies. So if you can encourage them to root more along the stems, this is the backup. So mound that area up and cover it, and it will root out of there strongly. So if squash borers hit it back here, it's basically a new plant from here. So any pumpkins that are coming up here, there's going to be a root system to support them. They may suffer a bit if they get hit by the vine borers, but it's usually not catastrophic. You have to go along and basically make bulkheads by covering it. And I've done that multiple times with these because I have been hit by squash borers and lost some of my favorite pumpkins that way. Which gives me one more thing that I have to say to you about growing pumpkins. You can grow them up trellises and into trees, particularly the Seminole Pumpkins will do that. But if those vines are growing up, they don't have the capability of rooting further into the ground. So if you don't have a problem with squash borers, vine borers, you could do that. But when people say, why don't you trellis them or let them run or anything, I'll tell you, I have let them do that before. I've let them climb over fences and up into trees, and they've been hit by squash borers. The entire part that's climbing dies, and I lose the whole plant, and I lose any fruit that's on it. Whereas when I just let them run on the ground, and I go ahead, cover the nodes, then the plant can survive a damaging event because it's got redundancy built into it. So that's something you want to think about. If you don't have squash borers, sure, you can let them climb, but if you do, you better do this. There's not a lot of other pests that I've had problems with pumpkins. There are minor pests usually, but the squash borers are the absolute worst of any of them that I've faced, and that's the one that truly gives me fear. And so I'm pretty meticulous about coming out, and when I think about it, I'm gonna stick a mound of dirt over here, and I'm gonna stick a mound of dirt over there. That way I can get through those events. The last thing about growing pumpkins that you need to know is when to harvest them. So this one right here is a Seminole pumpkin. Now I know the variety of this is not supposed to be pale green. It is supposed to be towards a tan orange color, like a light tan orange, leaning towards white. And this color is not there. But if I didn't know what the color was supposed to be on it, and maybe I just crossed all my seeds together or that sort of thing, I could also look here. This is really my main indicator. Here's the stem. You can see this stem is starting to turn yellow. As this stem gets more yellow, when it gets really yellow and it's starting to turn brown and hard, then I know, chop, I can cut it. Don't break it off here because your pumpkin won't keep nearly so long. Cut it with a pair of loppers or little hand pruners or something. Just go right there and trim it off. And don't carry it by the stem because you'll break it off. But when this gets yellow, starts to turn brown and get hard, I know that it's not putting any more juice into this thing. And the rind should be firm. It should have its full color. At that point, you harvest it and you bring it inside. But even then, it's not ready for the table. If you take it to the table right away and you eat it, you will get a starchy pumpkin that does not have great flavor. You'll think, gosh, this variety was supposed to be amazing, but it doesn't taste good. And the reason is they have an after harvest curing time that's when the flavor really comes out. It ages out well and the richness of the pumpkin flavor comes in. And this is going to be like a month to 6 weeks. So just cut it, stick it on your shelf, put it part of your fall display, and then after it's sat there for 6 weeks or so, then you could go ahead and cut it open and roast it or do whatever you're going to do with it. But wait for it. Good things come to those who wait, and pumpkin flavor just gets so much better if you wait a bit. So same thing with your winter squashes. If it's a storage pumpkin or squash, give it some time. Give it some time for the flavor to come in. Now, peppos don't take as long. Maybe a few weeks on a peppo. They don't actually keep that long. So if you know it's a cucurbita peppo, it's a little different. You got to eat them a little faster. But maximas and machadas, give them that time and the flavor is so much better. So I hope this video is helpful for you with growing pumpkins and getting started. It's really, really fun to grow. Yes, you're going to need a little bit of space. And yes, you can't control it. It just wants to go crazy. But to me, that's part of the fun. Somebody asked me the other day, what's my favorite thing to grow in the garden? I've got to say, pumpkins. Pumpkins are fun and exciting. They crossbreed and give you interesting varieties. They run like crazy. They go where you don't want them to go. They take over your lawn. They get into your trees. They're beautiful. And at the end of it, you get all of this artwork. These incredible squashes, pumpkins. The variety is unbelievable. It's like artwork made by God in the garden. And I can't think of hardly anything more beautiful to grow. Eating it, well, that's another story. You've got to figure out how you like it. But growing it, man, even if they were just for decorations, I would grow them. But the fact that they're a storable, survival crop that's healthy, good for you, keeps a long time, man, it just gets better and better. So thanks for joining me. Be sure to learn more about melon pits in my book, Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting. And of course, more about pumpkins on my website, thesurvivalgardener.com, where you can see the Seminole Pumpkin Project and other articles on how to grow pumpkins. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. Catch you all next time. And until then, may your thumbs always be green.
Sugar pie. Sugar pie. I'm gonna let my hair grow, baby. My boss can't stop me. I'm gonna take a payday loan.
Hey hon, come check out this soil. It's taken me all day to do.
Hi, hon. Wow, this soil is so rich.
I know, it's trying to be like me.
Oh my word. Is this a water apple tree?
Yeah, it's gonna go great in the soil.
Wow, it's really gonna take off here. What's in the soil anyways?
It's best you keep your business to yourself.
All right, I don't need no answers.